Hello, welcome to Podfic Galore. I'm your horrible online reader, Goldscut. I read out loud fanfictions for you busy bees, free of charge, and no strings attached. Today I will continue reading the Silmarillion fic by Aeolian Sands from Archive of Our Own, called The Rescue Party, Chapter 10. I hope you can at least try to enjoy my voice, and I will try my best for you with the equipment available to me. On with the show. The Rescue Party, Chapter 10. Peaceful Sailing. 3 weeks later. Maedhros, Lord of Himring and Warden of the East, was exhausted. In Valinor, one could return from a harmless expedition or adventure and spend the next few days relaxing at home, reading old books, and resting from a week spent away. But in Beleriand, rest was impossible. Even after weeks fighting the hordes, holding them off despite the endless onslaught, despite being close to death oneself, one would still be expected to wake early the next day. And that was if he slept at all. Maedhros did not remember the last time he had slept. The repairs to the fortress walls were slow going, the infirmary overflowing, supplies low, and Maklor's general moodiness was not helping matters. Maedhros had managed to find rooms for his brother's people, and enough food and medicinal herbs for Himring's weary healers to care for them. But Makalore stalked about the halls like an irritated, over-emotional house cat, and Maedhros just didn't have the time to deal with it. A soft knock sounded on the door, and the Warden of the East groaned, dropping his head and grabbing fistfuls of red hair. He took a deep breath and let go, sitting up straighter at his desk. Yes. A letter from the King of Nargothrond. Finrod. Maedhros had half a mind to turn the elf outside the doors away, but Finrod was doing the work of Elo Ilvatar himself by accepting the host not one, not two, but 3 of his brothers. Amnos writing earlier that Karantir had decided to travel with Kelegarm and Kurofin as well. Maedhros would be lying to say he was not a little bit concerned about that arrangement. Come in then, Maedhros replied, and the door opened to reveal the brunette head of Yarakuinga, who, as always, was dressed in dark greens and browns. The hunter-turned-advisor strode up to Maedhros' desk in 3 long strides and slapped a faintly golden envelope onto the desk. Maedhros looked up at the ancient elf with a sigh. You look irritated, he noted as he reached for a letter opener. Yara huffed. He looked at the intricate map hanging behind his lord's head, the one that he himself had made. I went riding this morning, he proclaimed. I thought it might be good for my head to leave the fortress at last. And I know these lands better than even Greycloak himself, and I dare say I love them more. That while the snow, rocks, and trees look the same, there is now a current of fear and despair everywhere. Even the animals feel it. The sun burns cold. I've never thought of you as a poet. Yarakuinga laughed. Never a poet, but the truth remains. I see a fallen land, and know a great host sits eating and drinking in the west, while we bleed out in these ever-cold hills. Maedhros' mouth twitched. Yara, the Valar were never going to help. If they could be moved by suffering, they would have destroyed Angband completely when they learned of the orcs. The hunter sat down heavily on one of the chairs in front of the desk, and looked at Maedhros curiously. You've grown much in wisdom, my lord. You're starting to remind me of Rumil. Fenrir's eldest smiled. If only I have half the wisdom of the esteemed lore master. But he held up the letter from Finrod. Let's see what my cousin has to say. To Lord Neliofinwe of Himring, Warden of the East. From King Findorato of Nargothrond, Friend of Men. Cousin, I hope you are as well as can be in these dark times. The loss of my brothers and our king continues to weigh heavily on my heart, but I continue with the knowledge that they are healing in Mundus and will suffer no more. Alas, Findulas is wise beyond her years when she tells me not to weep for the dead, but for the living who must continue on. She then took my hand and walked me straight to my desk and pointed at the mountain of paperwork. Continue on, uncle, she said most solemnly. I still have not been able to escape her watchful gaze. In fact, I am most afraid she will force me to continue on until there is no more continuing to be done, and your poor cousin shall continue past the end of time itself. In any event, back to the business at hand. I have received the hosts of your brothers, Korma, Kurufinue, and Karnistir into Nargothrond. Kurvo says Karnistir himself has gone to stay with Delvo. This is just as well, for being outnumbered 3-1 in my own kingdom would not have been pleasing to everyone here. Not to worry though, I have made it clear to all that our guests are to be welcomed and treated kindly. Are you planning on riding to Hithlum? I wish to give Fingon my respects and make sure he's well. Although perhaps it is a foolish idea for the two of us to travel together at this time. Also, Artemis visited me. Like all of us, she's working through the despair of the Bragolak in her own way, but she did say the oddest thing. Something about Nolofinwe and even your father being, well, I cannot remember the word now, but not in Mondos was the essential message. Whether or not this means that they refused to call or were re-embodied, I do not know. Although perhaps Artemis has been spending entirely too much time with Melia and the Meyer. In any case, I hope to hear from you soon. Perhaps you could pay me a visit, or I will see you in Hithlum. Pindarato, Arafinweya. Matros looked up from his reading and passed the letter to his advisor. "Read this, Yara," he ordered, as he shifted through his own mountain of paperwork. Something was not right. At last, he found the small envelope that had been addressed to him in Amoros's neat script. He had already read this one, but needed to do so again just to make sure. Unfolding the paper, his eyes went immediately to the damning line. "Morio has written to me that he plans to go to Nargothrond after all. What did Findarata do to deserve to be so popular? And why would our brothers wish to live in a cave?" Matros double-checked the date on both envelopes. Iron hells. Garantera was missing. Yarakuinga put down the letter. "That last paragraph about Artanis was intriguing," he remarked. "Some of the other elves that awoke in Quivienen also refused to call. They simply faded." Matros, who had long since learned to take life one crisis at a time. "Yes, and it'll save us all if my uncle and father return to haunt us. But let's take young Findolas's advice and concern ourselves first with the living." Findolasa writes that Karnistir did not arrive. Yet this letter is dated only 3 days ago. Yes, it arrived by messenger hawk. And yet it would appear that Moria found the time over 2 weeks ago to write to Telvo that he was going to Nargothrond. It can take far longer than 2 weeks to reach Nargothrond, especially now. Are you suggesting that Morio would have written Delvo but completely neglected to tell Findarato about his plans? His letter could have been intercepted. Yara shrugged. I just chuckled. Nah, this is straight from Book of Morifinwe. He's trying to disappear. Yaraquinga looked down at the scattered letters on Madros's desk. For a long moment, he didn't say anything at all. Then he took a deep breath. You should go. What? Madros turned around from where he had wandered to stare at the bookshelf. You should go see your cousins, Hithlum or Nargothrond. But this place is eating at you. You are agitated and too quick to jump to conclusions. Follow Lord Garnistir's footstep if it would put your mind at ease. Take Lord Makalaru too. If you have switched sides, Yara, you might as well suggest that we paint targets on our backs. You think Moringotta isn't going to be tempted having so many descendants of Finwë in one place? And yet, he didn't attack Lake Mithrim after Nolfinwe's host arrived, or he could have so easily slain you and your brothers all at Formenos. And, of course, there was also the Feast of Reuniting. What are you getting at? I think that Moringotta doesn't always take the obvious opportunities. He'd rather keep us in the dark and in fear, striking suddenly and without warning. Madros shook his head. And if he does strike Hithlum, well, Findarato, Findakana, myself, and for all intents and purposes we can assume the rest of my brothers ended up there as well. Yaraquinga smiled. Then he shall have exposed his flank to your valiant people in the east. Madros shrugged. You are the worst advisor. Did my grandfather ever tell you that? I told your grandfather that. Madros sat down heavily on his chair. Yara wasn't wrong. He was agitated staying here. He didn't like the idea of 3 brothers so far out of his reach. He really didn't like the idea of one of them disappearing off the known map. And he wished to visit Vingon to comfort him after the death of his father and to reassure him that he would make a great High King. His cousin was one to doubt himself from time to time, but to leave Himring now, although it was true, he had loved before, and Morgoth tended to release his hordes in sudden bursts after a period of false rest. Madra scrunched his eyes closed, but even as he weighed the decision, he realized that this time his heart was winning over the logic of his mind. "All right," he sighed, letting his hand drop to the desk. "I'll go and take the brooding one with me. If you turn traitor after all, and this is an elaborate ploy to take Himring, then you should know that it really is quite miserable, and the paperwork is not worth a title. But I name you the region all the same. Be ready in case of the worst. And pray to whatever Valar still love you that Moringoth does not come forth again from his walls for some time." Fëanor awoke with a very stiff back and a world that rocked back and forth. His eyes adjusted to the glare of the sun, and he realized that everything was far too bright. He attempted to bring a hand to his eyes, only to realize that it was tied down. Not good. He looked to his side and found that his right hand had been secured to the gunwale of a wooden ship with an iron cuff and chain. But that was not all. On the other side of him, Fingolfin and Finarfin lay, each also with one hand secured to the ship's railing. Fëanor huffed. Did Morgoth really think he could restrain the spirit of fire with a single chain? He sat up and began inspecting the cuff, running his free hand over it and searching for impurities in the metal. Of course, he soon found several. The trick was going to be generating enough torque to break the point of weakness where the chain connected. Oh. Fëanor realized then that the chain itself was merely looped around a wooden plank that formed part of the guardrail. The wood would give out far before the iron. Very well then. This would be a problem solved by leverage. He laid down again on his back and firmly planted his feet on the side of the ship. Wrapping his hand around the chain as not to injure his wrist, he prepared to explosively propel himself backwards with the muscles of his leg. "Fëanor alert!" feminine voice cried. "Nathaniel, where's the circlet? I have use of it." There was a scuffle of feet on wooden planks, and Fëanor suddenly found himself looking up into the eyes of 3 beautiful ladies, one of which he was married to. Then he remembered Nathaniel striding into the underwater cave, attempting to heal him before he again lost consciousness. He wondered just how long he had been out. "Nathaniel!" he exclaimed, slowly taking his feet off the boat side and sitting up to a more dignified position. "Why are you here?" In retrospect, he should have expected the slap. "Ow," he replied. "That was for leaving me, for damning our children, for dying, for resurrecting, and for trying to run back into trouble without telling me." "Ow," Fëanor repeated, and his back was literally up against the wall. Well, I'm sorry for the first 3 things," he offered. "The whole reason for my going back is to try and make amends and help our sons." Nathaniel put her hands on her hips. "But you're not sorry for leaving without us, without even letting us know? If it weren't for the 3 of us, as well as for Ulmo and Uinen, the 3 of you would all be dead right now." Fëanor looked down. "I didn't realize you thought so strongly about it." Nathaniel knelt then, and gently took Fëanor's face into her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Of course I felt strongly about it. I should have never let you go the first time, and I would have stopped you now if our kids were safe at home. But they're not. So now I'm going with you to correct our mistakes." Fëanor looked up at his sister-in-laws and saw them both nod in agreement, and for some inexplicable reason, it felt like a great weight had fallen off his shoulders. He let his head fall onto Nathaniel's shoulder for a few moments of rest. "How long have I been unconscious?" he asked, his voice muffled by Nathaniel's clothing. And why have you chained us to the boat's railing? It's a bit extreme, is it not? Nerdanel chuckled and brushed her husband's hair. 3 weeks. What? Fenrir instantly lifted his head back up and nearly stood up but thought better of the last second. 3 weeks? Edwin smiled. Ulma kept you under. You would have healed quickly, but Arafinwe and Anaira were both gravely injured. Nella was pretty badly hurt as well. He simply decided to keep all 3 of you sedated until Ara and Anaira were fully healed, and it took about 3 weeks of resting at his halls in Ekkaya. Ekkaya? You mean that we were in the waters of Ekkaya for 3 entire weeks, and I slept through it, all of it? Nadina recognized the old adventurous glint in her husband's eye. She rejoiced that some of the old Fëanor seemed to be returning to her. Don't worry, Nara. It was quite boring. The halls are deep and peaceful and quiet. I do not believe you would find them that different from Mondo's, with the exception that the occasional fish swims by. So you get to be awake? Of course. I did not chase a giant electric eel, nor did I leap onto it from on high, she replied, eyeing Anaire, whose cheeks turned red. Anaire? Fëanor asked in surprise. I may have let too much of Nala rub off on me, she admitted. But don't fret, I didn't get to see Ulmo's halls either. Because you broke your pelvis, Nerdanel stated matter-of-factly. Fëanor's eyebrows rose. Did you slay the eel? Of course. And suddenly the former king felt uncomfortable. He wondered how the years in Alman had changed the girls. Something he would need to ask Ara about. Well, if I promise not to set fire to the ship, will you let us go? Ulma himself said that we could not, Anara answered. He has had quite enough trouble on the seas and says that the last thing he needs are the 3 of you attempting to sail. But, Nerdanel, there's a puff coming. I need you on the main line to pull the sail a little bit, Alwyn said, softly but in a voice that still held power. Fëanor watched aghast as his wife kissed him on the brow, stood up, and left him there against the gunwale. He had half the mind to free himself, but then he saw Fingolfin stir next to him. Nolo, he asked, reaching across with his free hand to shake his brother's shoulder. Bright, too bright, Fingolfin murmured. Then he tugged on his chained wrist, and it was like a bolt of lightning struck him, for immediately Fingolfin was leaping to his feet, only to be tugged down again. Aya, steady! Fëanor yelled. Nara? Fingolfin asked, confusion in his eyes as he looked about him. Yes, it is I. What? Where are we? Relax, you're not about to be ambushed by the host of Balrogs. Idiot! We're on a ship. Really? I thought this was the moon. Fëanor kicked him. All right, wise lore master. Could explain why we are on a ship? Where's the ship taking us? Who's sailing it? Or how about why my hand is tied to the railing? I think all your answers are right there. And Fëanor nodded at where Nerdanel was hauling a length of mainline and securing it to the cleat of silver. Elwyn was nodding at her, her skin glistening in the sun, and Anaire sat at the tiller, the sea spray splashing up behind her as she steered the vessel. I think I awoke too early. Good night, Fingolfin murmured, lying back down on his side. Fëanor rolled his eyes. He then stared at Finarfin on his other side. It was getting boring just sitting there. Maybe he could see how many flicks to the forehead it would take to wake him. He was just about to start flicking his youngest brother when he noticed the pale scars extending just past the neckline of Ara's tunic. Those were new. What exactly had Finarfin been doing while he was fighting the eel? But before Fëanor had the chance to wake his brother, Finarfin's blue eyes fluttered open, and he stared at Fëanor in shock. Not the sight I was hoping to wake up to, he grumbled as he sat up. Ara, what happened to you? Fëanor asked. Those scars. Finarfin eyed him strangely, no doubt trying to figure out where exactly he was and what exactly had happened. He squeezed his eyes shut for a few moments. I think I am in a nightmare, he replied matter-of-factly. Nathaniel thinks you're dead. And while I don't believe her, I still have my doubts at times. And yes, I dreamt you were really dead, and then you came crashing out of the sky like a meteor. With Nolo, who was also dead, and then you went on a raid through Tinion, destroyed a tree, and then went flying off a cliff in the deep waters while I fought a horde of jellyfish. Sounds about right, Fenrir nodded. But it is all true. You're dead? Nolo here and I broke out of Mundus. Fenrir explained matter-of-factly. Don't involve me in this. I was an idiot once. No longer. Ingolfin's voice murmured. Sure. Nolo is here? Nolo is here. We're sailing west to bring our children home. Send Moringot through the door of night, and reclaim the Silmarili. Ingolfin audibly groaned. Finarfin's eyes widened, and suddenly he appeared a lot more coherent. Stars and sapphires! How do we get on a ship? Where's Osse? But before Fëanor could answer, there was a flutter of silver, and someone was hugging Finarfin. Fëanor looked aside to see that Eärwen had wrapped her arms around her husband. You fool! I thought you promised never to scare me so badly again, Eärwen whispered to him. Fëanor felt suddenly like he was interfering in a private moment. There were a few times where I feared you had gone to Mundus. Finarfin laughed quietly. Never. I'll stay till the end. Then Eärwen stood up and frowned. Just because you almost died, it does not excuse your actions. Nolo's awake, Fëanor hastily interrupted. Eärwen stopped her lecture to glare at Fëanor. I would rather not hear this lecture 3 times. The middle child is only pretending to sleep, as middle children often do. I should know. I have between 5 and 6 of them, depending on how you count. No! Someone shouted aghast from across the deck. She sounded very disappointed and quite angry. Fëanor took the elbow to the ribs gladly. It was worth it. Because while Nathaniel could be a grizzly bear, she was without a doubt a kind of heart. Because while Nathaniel could be a grizzly bear, she was without a doubt a kind at heart. And Eärwen was altogether too good for this world. But Anaida could be genuinely scary. The lady in question strode over without a word and took a fistful of Fingolfin's tunic in her hand and dragged him upright. Peace! Peace! Fëanor's brother shouted, throwing his free hand up. Anaida scowled and let him go. Do you have any idea what you've put me through? No, Fingolfin replied helplessly. Okay, let me count this off. 1, she held a finger up. You die. I feel upon snap. And I grieve for my idiot husband, who was so stubborn that even when the ships burned, a sure sign as any that he should come back to me, his stubborn heart decided to cross the thrice-damned grinding ice instead. There was no saving Fingolfin now. Fëanor wondered casually if Anaida had a bit of spirit fire herself. 2, she exclaimed. I had barely even started grieving when I suddenly feel you alive again. And, lo and behold, someone screams outside the palace walls and 2 draft horses are missing. You decided to follow this one. She stared at Fëanor with eyes of flame. Fëanor just raised an eyebrow in challenge. But Anaida was already continuing her argument. Clearly, he was not her main target. You followed this one again. And you didn't even think to see me? Anaida shook her head, dark hair trailing the movement. I would cast you into the sea with an anchor tied around your neck if I didn't love you so much. And then she kissed him. And Fëanor turned away, suddenly wishing he was thrown overboard. At least Anaida backed away. You owe me for all that, she finished. Fingolfin was smiling. Very well, my lady, but aren't you a bit of the same? I thought I saw you jump off a cliff to stab an eel the size of a dragon, one that breathed blue lightning. Anaida growled and pushed Eärwen forward, obviously indicating that she could have the floor back. This one maiden began awkwardly. Finarfin looked up at her. It's all right, my love. I understand the point. But for what it's worth, I still believe you would have made a wonderful queen. Fëanor didn't think there was anything wrong with that sentence. But there must have been, because suddenly a circlet was flying through the air. It hit Finarfin in the chest and dropped to his lap. Oh, his youngest brother replied sadly, taking the crown in his one free hand and turning it to inspect its pearls and sapphires. I don't know. I thought it was rather perfect. I'm sorry if you hate it so. He hung his head, blonde hair obscuring his face. Finarfin was good. Too good. It's not the crown, you lovable idiot. She knelt by Finarfin and brushed his hair out of the way. It is that you were leaving me. Erwin then gave him a chaste kiss on the lips and stepped away. Fenrir rolled his eyes again and saw Nerdanel's glance. She waved him off. Fenrir knew very well what she really meant. Later. While it is great that everyone has reached a common understanding, this was Nola Finway using his diplomatic voice again, I think we all might be a good deal more uncomfortable if you freed us from these cuffs. Ulmo told us he would sink the ship the minute we let the three of you wander free, Erwan explained this time, a little bit of sorrow in her voice. Are they too tight? Finarfin shook his head. Nola Finway sighed. How far from Beleriand are we? We should be there by nightfall, Erwan declared, glancing up at Arian's path in the sky. And then she caught up Fëanor's brothers on how long they had been unconscious. And Fëanor heard the story of Finarfin and the jellyfish, deciding for himself that he never wanted to swim too far from the coast again. As Fingolfin was explaining all about their escape from Mondos and the flight through Tirion, Fëanor found himself nodding off in the sun's warm embrace. End of chapter 10. Stay tuned.